We are now in part 4 of lecture 1 about Michael Sandel's justice. We're going to discuss the 2008 bailout example. We're going to discuss in the defense and objection to the bailout, using utilitarian welfare-based and freedom-deserving-based values. We're going to discuss the trolley example. In defense of the sacrifice in the trolley example, a utilitarian welfare-based argument will be used. In objection to the sacrifice in the trolley example, freedom-based argument will be used. And finally, we'll use the third example, the Afghan goat herds example. Here, we're going to flip the script just a bit. In defense of the non-sacrifice, we'll use a freedom-based argument. And in objection to the sacrifice, we'll use a utilitarian welfare-based argument. And as you can see, this is exactly the opposite discussion of sacrifice in terms of values. In the case of the trolley example, and in the case of the Afghan goat herds example. But let's get to it. Let us consider the 2008 bailout example next. We are reminded of the 2008 economic recession in the United States. It was largely as a result of excessively risky investments in the form of home loans, but also in other forms of loans and other forms of financial dealings by banks and investment firms on the Wall Street. As an indication of the more general consequences of these actions, many of the loans could not be paid, and persons and organizations defaulted on them. Banks can usually handle such defaulting in some amount, but when that amount is too large, banks fail. Excessive risk meant that too many of such risky investments by banks were made. And then banks asked for the US government to step in and loan them the money, revenue from the US taxes, until the time that they could recover and pay the loans back. Since the banks were no longer able to make it on their own, since so many of their loans were defaulted on. Eventually, the banks recovered and the loans were paid back. But there were many objections from citizens to bailing the banks in this manner. After all, other businesses and organizations do not get bailed out when they fail. The defense of the bailout stated that the major banks, the defense of the bailout stated that if the major banks do not receive assistance, then the whole economy is likely to collapse, leading to a much greater suffering and harm than that involved in the bailout. This is clearly a utilitarian welfare argument, but we may understand it as a freedom-based argument as well. It is hard to conceive that person's freedom is unaffected when their country's economy is in ruins. No work, savings wiped out by inflation, no production of goods and services, etc. The opponents of the bailout argued against rewarding of greed. They flat out condemned greed. We should construe that argument as a civic virtue, moral argument. A good society is not one in which greed is at excess. These opponents also argued against rewarding failure. We can construe that argument as a very general argument against giving persons what they do not deserve. The argument regarding desert is really a freedom-based argument. One deserves blame for failure and praise for success when one freely chooses actions that lead to either one of these. Right? So we're going to construe the argument, you don't deserve that, as a freedom-based argument, meaning that you have chosen to do actions that do not deserve whatever it is that's in question. So there were really two objections to the bailout. One was a civic virtue objection, and the second was a freedom-based objection that says those were poor choices. They do not deserve to be rewarded. The strength of the objector case was further multiplied by that upon receiving of the bailout money, the Wall Street Bank and investment firms gave large bonuses to their executives. Again, this is part of the don't deserve freedom-based argument. Sandel asks us to reflect upon the following from these objections to the bailout. If our objection is to greed among these Wall Street bankers, then would we have objected to their greed if it did not lead to this crisis? If their greed instead had added to all of our wealth? Can we really blame the executives of the Wall Street companies for the course onto which they steered their firms? Could they really have done anything else in order to survive and thrive in the competitive Wall Street environment that was a result of a long development from the very inception of the Wall Street institution? Sandel was trying to make us think about easing our blame of the bankers. The next example we should consider is the famous hypothetical trolley problem. Here's Sandel's version of it. Let us conceive of a runaway train, the brakes of which do not work, and it is on the course to kill 5 people. We are standing on the bridge across the tracks and can push a very large man onto the tracks, who would be killed by the train, but who would also thereby stop the train and save 5 people from dying. Would it be morally right to push the large man onto the tracks? As you may have guessed by now, the utilitarian moral principle commands us to sacrifice the one man to save 5. That is our acting on the basis of the value of welfare and aiming to maximize it. On the other hand, we also understand that it would be wrong to kill an innocent person, even if that killing leads to the otherwise overall beneficial consequences. This objection is best construed on the basis of the value of freedom. We would be sacrificing that person against their will. Likewise, on the basis of the value of freedom, we can say that this person has not chosen to do anything by which they deserve to be killed in this manner. So the pro runaway train or trolley argument is that welfare will be maximized by sacrificing the one person. The contra argument in the trolley runaway train case is that we would not be respecting the freedom of the one person that we would sacrifice. They don't choose to be sacrificed, nor have they chosen to do anything that would merit that they should be sacrificed. What we should learn from this moral dilemma is once again the relevance of the values of welfare and freedom for moral reasoning, and even that of virtue, civic virtue. There are 2 more examples that drive a similar point home with some additional benefit for our learning. Here's the first example. 4 Navy SEALs were on a mission in Afghanistan to assassinate one of the chief assistants to Osama bin Laden, as a consequence of which many victims of the terrorist acts of his organization would be saved. Some goatherds, 2 men and a boy, crossed the path of the SEALs and can now report the SEALs' location to the nearby terrorists, whether willingly or by being tortured out of them by those terrorists. The SEALs take it that they must make a decision: kill the goatherds and save the SEALs and the victims of the terrorists, or let the goatherds go and risk the lives of the SEALs and the victims of the terrorists. As in the trolley example, the utilitarian reasoning tells the SEALs to execute the goatherds, while their commitment to the value of freedom, together with the accompanying value of deserving, command the SEALs to let the goatherds go. As it happens, the SEALs decided to let the goatherds go, and the SEALs were shortly ambushed and killed, all but one of them. What we should learn from this actual and not hypothetical moral dilemma is that actual, unlike hypothetical moral dilemmas, are frequently complicated by the absence of knowledge about the outcomes of the actions. The SEALs did not know whether their letting the goatherds go would result in their being discovered. If they did, they would have more decisively taken the utilitarian line and killed the goatherds by the subsequent admission of one of the surviving, well, the only surviving SEAL.